couple of acknowledgments and disclaimers. The acknowledgments are LaTanya Wilson and Amanda Colclaser, who neither one could be here for the last couple of weeks, have been digging deeper and deeper, because every time we find something we think, oh, a new thing that nobody's talked about, then we flip over on the other side, they said, well, that might not have happened. And so the rabbit holes are deep and they're dark and they're amazing, and both of these ladies said that there's at least 3 more lectures in this. And so we're going to really summarize. So I got to acknowledge and thank you very much, guys. And the disclaimer. So I'm the youth education coordinator, and I'm, an educator by trade. And so unlike my esteemed colleagues who speak to academia, my target audience initially was not going to be a bunch of college profs in my empirical evidence and my original thoughts and ideas. This is not what you're going to see today. You're going to see me trying to explain a very complicated subject to a barely interested 7th grader, okay? After the first chance of that, I said that's not even going to be the case, because after about 3 minutes, I'm going to sound like the teacher from Charlie Brown, okay? So I backed out and I said I'm going to explain this to a highly interested 7th grader, and then, yes, there's 2 people that are going to follow me, and the rest of you can just try to laugh at the jokes, okay? So this is a 7th grade class presentation that we've honed somewhat to try to get a hold of and do the impossible. There's a reason this room's full for a brown bag. Daniel's going to tackle Brooks-Baxter. He's going to make it simple. Half the people in here already know that's an insane request. Like, it's not a simple thing. Even the newspapers at the time, you can't trust them, because they'll say the same thing, and then the next day it'll be a different story. And none of the numbers match up. And so it's very hard to piece together actually what happened. That's really fun for a history. One of the people that get bitten by the history mystery bug. Like, what really happened? At this point, I got a good idea. Whether I'm going to be able to tell you about it or not, you be the judge, right? So that's my disclaimer. If you don't get what you were expecting, that's because you expected too much, right? So we're going to start, and I'm going to go through it really fast, and just hold on, because I'm going to get to it eventually. But I'm going to tackle it like we were writing a movie. I'm selling you the idea, like, if anybody ever wants to fund this, I would love to write and shoot a full-length Brooks-Baxter War movie. Wouldn't it be great? Because I think I could tell the story then, but give me $20 million, right, in 2 hours, I could tell a good story. I don't have that, neither the time nor the money. So here we go. And I got to turn this on. That's where, that's the best image to start with, because we all know it. That's somewhere outside of Pine Bluff, and you got a picture of Baxter, a picture of Brooks, and it's way more troops than even were involved, but it makes for a good story. It's one example out of very many telling a story that, it's sensationalized media, guys. There's, that's what we see in all of these. I'll show you one later that is impossible. It's an impossible picture, but it looks good. It tells a good story. It's on the Old State House website, by the way. All right, so here we go. This is real simple, Daniel. It's just a question, just to answer the question. The who, what, where, why, when, and how. Okay, I'm going to do that. Something easy, the where, the Old State House. That's why we're doing it. Like Leah said, what's with the cannon? Okay, it's Lady Baxter, and I tell the tour guide version of the Brooks-Baxter War. It's the 2-minute soundbite. This is what's in the history textbooks. Okay, so there's 2 guys running for election. Sounds like a bad joke, start off, I'm sorry. 2 guys are running for election, and one of them, it's too close to call. One of them takes the seat. The other gets an injunction later on. He removes the other by force. And then after a month, they're all told to go home and go back to Rome. What? Why? That doesn't even completely understand what actually happened. That's kind of what happened, if you guys know what I'm saying. That happened. That's not really what happened. But the tour guide version goes like that. There was a war. It's April to May 15th of 1874. A guy took over the state of Arkansas. Well, upon the research, he actually didn't. Okay, his point, and there's a brief that this is the defense of Joseph Brooks. He was the one that was right the whole time. Well, there's another one that says Baxter was right the whole time, because it gets very complicated when these political appointed judges start making decisions. I'm getting ahead of myself, please. Just bear with. So there's the cannon. It takes place at the Old State House, primarily in that 1 month, 30-day time period, and the state of Arkansas. So when? This is another easy one. During Reconstruction. Okay, this is not new. This is basically the textbooks agree from 65 to 77. This is what was going on, okay? I don't expect you to read all the slides, nor will I read them to you. It's meant to confuse you. as I tapped in early on, Reconstruction, I needed an image because I love images. I'm very visual spatial. This popped up. You guys recognize that one. This was in a U.S. History Frameworks thing. The old State House in Little Rock was the picture that they chose as their Reconstruction image. And I thought, well, that's too good not to put in a PowerPoint. So we've already answered the where and the when. This is going to be like 10 minutes, right? The who, the key players. Powell Clayton, Joseph Brooks, and Elisha Baxter. There's just 3 people to talk about. Daniel, you ought to be done in 8 minutes. All right, so Powell Clayton was essentially carpetbagger, okay? And he was a Union general who leased some lands and did some farming down here, got a lot of wealth and political power, okay? Carpetbagger. Another carpetbagger. This is contemporary. This is how everybody sees him, kind of tall and skinny-legged and spectacles. In case you're really a scholar, you want to know what a carpetbagger is. It's a candidate who seeks election in the area with no local connections, but here in the South we say it's these northern guys who come down here and take over, right? Reconstruction is looked at poorly amongst some in our crowd. That's a joke. Anyway, so Joseph Brooks is our next player. I'm still on time here. This is good. This guy is a chaplain for an African American regiment. Okay, he is a man who's after equal suffrage for all men in 1872. That's a big deal. That's something that's not really talked about, but that's a key element. If you read the media package, it was like Daniel's going to try to point out some key elements that led to the Brooks-Baxter War. He's going to try. Okay, he's a carpetbagger. Okay, it's there. He's also a brindletail. This is a brindletail. Okay, that's a bull. I don't think they called him that to his face, right? I know they didn't call them carpetbaggers to their face. Like everything we use, and I've even read papers where people refer to these guys like they the minstrels. They wouldn't have called themselves that. That's a bad deal. All right, so anyway, he's somewhat attractive to the ex-Democrats, ex-Confederate Democrats, because that's another key factor. These guys are fixing to get the right to vote. Arkansas is the last state to not let these guys vote. And guess what? Politics is going to change once they get the right to vote. And so that's kind of foreshadowing. All right, so he's carpetbagger and brindletail. Why is he called a brindletail? Because he's got this loud, bellowing voice, and someone somewhere said he's as loud as a brindletail bull. Okay, that's simple. 7th grade facts. I'm sure you're all with me so far. Okay, he's also a reform Republican, one of the liberal Republicans. Okay, their big deal is to end disenfranchisement of ex-Confederates, reduce taxes, cut government spending, that stuff. Okay, Elisha Baxter. This guy is a scalawag. I'm sure he loved being called that. This is in Arkansas history textbooks, guys. Central to his campaign, different than the other guy, is disenfranchised. Wait a second, that's the same thing. You mean they had the same platform? Yes. Level 1 confusion. They're saying we want the same things. Okay, so he is backed by Powell Clayton and the regular Republicans, right? We'll get to them later. He's a scalawag, right? What is a scalawag? Okay, so this is a real thing. This is a real movie. Anybody seen this, Mark? Anybody? Thank you, David. Where 2 guys in the room have seen this movie. I have to. I can't die not having seen this, all right? I'm going to have to watch that. So he's also a minstrel, right? And what's a scalawag? For the scholars in the room, they love definitions. A person that behaves badly. What I tell the kids is a scalawag is what the pirates call a bad guy. Let that sink in. Pirates are bad guys, and so their bad guy is a scalawag. To us, it's just, a southerner that went to the other side. Okay, he was on the Reconstruction side. All right, he's a minstrel. This is, in case you missed it. He's backed by them. Why is he a minstrel? Because John Price was a musician. What's the big deal? Well, in the 1870s, the theater crowd was not your upper crust of society, okay? So to be called a minstrel, a traveling performer, that's the thing. And Daniel has chosen a politically correct minstrel, all right? There's probably other images that I did not show here that you guys can pull up and Google later on. So I'm replaying it over and over, so you're with me when I get to the confusing part. Regular Republicans, minstrels, Baxter, scalawag, disenfranchisement, and funny goat. All right. What? This is where it starts to get weird, okay? So essentially, 2 men claim they had won the governor's office. That's real simple so far. After a series of legal maneuvers, these men and their supporters engaged in armed conflict. Why? Not weird enough yet, is it? Okay. That's pretty weird. That's a real fish, by the way. That's Clayton's rise to power. So we got some factors here. Okay? During the War of the Rebellion, okay, two people, leases a plantation, East Arkansas, gains wealth and political power. He draws heavily financial capital from the north, okay? And his constitution establishes a powerful executive branch. Remember, all this is about the executive office. Railroads are going to be a deal, okay? One of his first things was to establish these government-backed bonds for these railroads being built in the state of Arkansas. Okay, there's going to be money made to the people who have interest in the railroads. That's another factor. Election results, election outcome. Joseph Brooks does a lot to get Clayton elected, even according to some, changing the votes, holding the polls open until the Democrats turned theirs in, and he adjusted the numbers. Okay, this is stuff you guys can find in the three major sources on this. This is not my opinion. These are numbers that I saw in two places. Okay? Final vote counts from Pulaski and Jefferson exceeded the number of registers by 1925. That's a big deal. Okay? Factors. How is it possible that they exceeded the number of registered voters by that many? This is one possible explanation. The dead were voting, right? What we know is some of these counts say that there were names crossed off in red from the Brooks tallies. That the Baxter people crossed off some of the guys. Like, that's not a real person. That person's dead. That's example. That's what this is talking about. Okay. So once Clayton gets in office, his friends and supporters they get patronage appointments. This is what happens. We're still talking about the why it happened, by the way. When the election was over, it's like Christmas for the Republicans except for Brooks. The guy that was really responsible for getting Clayton into office didn't get anything. Okay? And so how's he going to feel about that? He's not going to be very happy. Okay? And so that's a factor. Daniel's talking about factors today. Okay. More factors. Jump back in time. This is where if I was shooting the film, I would do it like a Quentin Tarantino thing and jump all over the place in time and keep you pretty disoriented. So Clayton was elected to the Senate, and so he can't serve out as governor, so he needs a guy. He picks Osroe Hadley. The state of Arkansas doesn't really acknowledge that Hadley was governor, and when you start looking, but the Governors Association nationally does. And there are telegraphs I've seen to Governor Hadley from Washington on all this. It's interesting. So Governor Hadley should be the guy that Clayton wants to run in 1872 in his place. Governor Hadley is not that man because he kind of messes up politically. Anybody know why? Okay, so according to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, Governor Hadley hires a guy from Ohio to do some work for $15,000. And the first night the guy's in Arkansas, he gets drunk and stays drunk the whole rest of the time he's in Arkansas, and the people don't like that and blame the governor for it. So guess what? You're not going to be the governor next time, pal. That's essentially all I found. So he spends a year in Europe during the Brooks-Baxter War, so he misses that completely, comes back and gets elected or appointed to the postmaster of Little Rock. He's the guy that starts home delivery of mail in Little Rock. So, he's not an all bad guy. There's no picture. Even Georgianne, we searched forever for a picture of Hadley. He's lucky he didn't wind up being a goat because I like putting pictures of goats in PowerPoint. You'll see that later. So more factors because that's what this is about, and I'm going way too fast, but that's okay. Clayton had to find a nominee. He found one in Elisha Baxter. Baxter had been around, and you remember, is Baxter a brindletail? Is he a scallywag? Is he a carpetbagger? We've already forgotten, haven't we? We probably need to revisit that later. So anyway, he's a scallywag. And he picked him. He's a lawyer, okay? He's a Batesville guy. Baxter County is named after this guy. He doesn't really have anything against him, so let's run him for a governor. That's a good reason. So that's essentially why they picked him. He hasn't done anything wrong yet. So there's more, okay? And just when you think that's a lot to handle, you can always put ducks under the handlebars. Don't forget that, okay? That's a lot of ducks, but you can always add more ducks. So here's more ducks. Let's revisit the thing here. What's this really about, Daniel? You haven't told us. Summarize. In case you missed it, when the election was over, it was like Christmas for everybody except for our friend Joseph Brooks. Brooks, who had been largely responsible, got nothing. Okay, so Brooks and Baxter, little summary here, each promised votes to the Confederates. So, time out. So what's the difference in their platforms? There are no, at this point, they essentially have the same platforms, except for one has the backing of the Powell-Clayton machinery, and the other does not. That's what we have so far in our definition. The Confederates remember a couple things. They hate Powell-Clayton, okay? He's the guy who come down here from the north and said, I'm a strong ruler, and I'm in charge of you now, and I don't care, you don't have the right to vote. Okay, how are they going to feel about that? These are strong Southern leaders in the Army and plantation owners and former politicians. They're not going to like this guy. Okay, so they blame Brooks for him being elected. Okay, he's a crook. Baxter, they view him as just another lapdog of Clayton. That's a lapdog. Okay, that's also a lapdog. Right? So at this point, we could probably say that the Brooks-Baxter War was about the control of the Democrat ex-Confederate votes in the future. Remember, Arkansas had not given them the right to vote yet, but everybody else had. And so that's on the table, even though they don't come out and say it, they're courting them. They're like, why? Because when these guys get back into office, if they say, hey, I was always on your side, guys, give me a little something, give me a job. That's potentially what this is about, is keeping a little bit of power once the Confederates get back in the office. This is about the Brooks-Baxter War. Lady Baxter. Well, I keep coming back to this because that cannon is primarily the only reason I'm standing up here today. Because every day I get asked about that cannon. And it's good stuff. Will Stevens did a whole paper on that cannon and found a picture of the Lizzie Simmons in Ohio courthouse, which is the only known thing we have of the Pontchartrain. So, that's a little sidebar. Oh my goodness. How what? I'm already confused, and you guys are still listening to me. So, how did he go down? How did what go down? This is getting frustrating. Insert rap about Brooks-Baxter for musical version. You weren't supposed to see that part, I'm sorry. So it's about votes. It's about votes. Seventh graders would have laughed at that. Okay? It's about votes. And so, here's an example. This is, I saw this two different places, and because some of you guys are sitting here, I'm not going to call you out. But votes from these four counties, big counties, 465 for Baxter and 0 for Brooks. That does seem suspicious. Even the goat thinks that that's suspicious. Okay? And so that's the stuff that Brooks has when he I'm getting ahead of myself, but when he goes to court. He's got real numbers. He's got real examples. All right, it's getting serious now, folks. So Brooks may have actually won the election. There's nobody, even Mrs. Nash says Brooks really won the election. That's why his name is before Baxter when everybody talks about this. That's a good reason of anybody. I like that. So how does Baxter get in the governor's office then? That's what the seventh graders want to know. Baxter supporters controlled the election machinery and declared Baxter, despite evidence of widespread voter fraud, is what we would say today. Irregularities. The goat is happy about Baxter getting into the office. How is that legal? Yes. That's the thing is here. When we sum this up, in the state of Arkansas, okay, I got a picture of this at the end, Supreme Court decision, when they clean this up, and I like the word clean it up, when they sum it up, they're like, what happened there? Okay. So when they sum it up, they said, this wasn't illegal. What Baxter did wasn't illegal. What the legislature did, what the Supreme Court did wasn't illegal. What Brooks did wasn't illegal. And so that gets us really confused because if everybody's doing all this maneuvering legally, and it's opposed to each other, but none of it is legal, that's one reason why this is a confusing thing to look back on as his story. Okay, so what happened next? This is what happened next. Brooks' supporters refused to accept these results. They appealed to the legislature. The legislature said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have time. We're not going to hear that." Why would they do such a thing, Daniel? Because the legislature is Powell Clayton machinery. They don't want to hear the proof that your guy won when our guy's already in office. So they can find a way to say, there's some, I move we don't listen to it. Seconded, votes, aye, we're not listening to you, sorry. That's how that went down, by the way. General Assembly's failure to act says, okay, we'll go to the courts. And he gets his paperwork. This takes a year, okay? 72 election, and he spends a year doing the paperwork, getting the lawyer stuff intact, and Brooks has his stuff together. His legal appeals failed for a year. They just shove him aside. We don't want to hear that. That's not a real thing. You're making stuff up, Mr. Brooks. That's essentially what they're saying to him. So they fail until political circumstances change. And this is a big question. So what changes? Well, you got Powell Clayton supporting Baxter, and Baxter's going to go in office and try to hold on to Powell Clayton's machinery and everybody that's got these patronage positions. But Baxter starts courting the ex-Dems, the Democrats. And he's like, look, I can see the writing on the wall. You guys are going to get elected. I want to work for you. He probably said that behind some closed doors. And it's obvious to Clayton, this guy who's supposed to be in there working for us is not working for us. He's working for the other guys. And so Clayton, the only thing he can do is support the guy who established a faction of the Republican Party to go against Clayton, which was Joseph Brooks. And so now we've got something, instead of a lineage of how factions work, we have a spider web, okay? And that's what's going on. The biggest deal, why I focused on the railroads, is when he refuses to sign this stuff. I'm sorry, you guys. This is important. That's why it's in black. Okay? His hostile attitude toward the railroads and the Republican Economic Party. Remember, in Powell Clayton's 68, after he got elected, he established all these things that would benefit the railroad and back them with state bonds. So Baxter refused to sign the bonds, and he started raising questions about the legality of these bonds. So not only has he gone against the wishes of Powell Clayton, he's actually questioning the motives. And he's saying, I don't even think this is legal, so we're not going to do it. Why would he do that when he was their guy a year ago? He's courting those ex-Dems that hate Powell Clayton and hate the Northern Railroad interest and all this. This is my part. This is where I'm like trying to put sense to it. Why would he go against them? Because it makes sense to him if he's going to go over with them. Okay? So Powell Clayton even comes back to Arkansas for this, and they determine they're going to remove Baxter. So how do they do that? They find one of the circuit court writs that had been issued or requested by Brooks, and they do a reversal of the demurrer which Baxter had filed against this writ, which this is not the day for legal speak, so we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. And they say, guess what? We were wrong for a year. You were actually the guy that won. Do what it takes to go take back the Arkansas governor's office. And so at that point, some people have written that Joseph Brooks has usurped the state of Arkansas. Usurpers that's illegal. That's something, if he wanted to come in here by force and take the governor's office, he could have done it a year ago. He didn't do that. He took the right course. And eventually, the political atmosphere, including the courts, flipped over to his side and made it happen. And so that's what happened. He comes in and he says, hey there, Jack, you're in my seat. And so he politely gets him escorted. The story goes that the head of the head of the militia that was with Brooks physically removes Baxter from office. And then there's another story, and then I use this because this is all stories to me. They were supposed to arrest Baxter. I don't see any evidence of that contemporary to when this went down. But somebody said a month later, you know what, this would have been easier if we'd have just arrested him and he wouldn't have been able to establish a government down the street. So that deals a pretty heavy blow to Elisha Baxter. And here's, Governor Brooks. What happens? I need to talk about this for a second. Essentially, they fortify the Capitol building here. That's why we're talking about it. The old State House becomes this castle fortification with the Brooks troops because there's already been maneuvering for a year with people on each side. And so how do you decide which side you want to be on? Because Brooks was an abolitionist before this, right? And he was a chaplain for an African-American regiment. And he wants equal suffrage for all men, okay? And so it would make sense that the African-Americans would be on his side. Elisha Baxter has already taken in that same approach to equal suffrage. His first year in office, he starts really maneuvering for the same reasons. From all accounts, there's one I'm going to show you here in a second that says that Brooks mostly African-American troops and Baxter's mostly white troops. That's not true. We found occasions, newspaper articles, where they were maybe even equal numbers of ex-Democrat, ex-Confederate Democrats and African-American troops on Brooks' side and on the Baxter side. Because I looked into, I chased that rabbit hole angle for a little bit. What were the racial dynamics of this? And there's a young man that wrote a dissertation in 2012 out of Kentucky that I'm going to get into farther, and he breaks the demographics down, but that's a whole solid hour presentation in its own. And maybe next April we'll do the demographics of the men involved after we talked about these key figures. So, rallying the troops to protect the Capitol from the ousted Baxter's troops. Okay, so I'm not going to break down all the battles, but I'm going to show you all the images we found. So Plum Creek, why was there a battle there? Because everybody from around the state who has a real solid interest in either the Baxter or the Brooks side are racing to Little Rock. Plus, it's going to go down. There's going to be a thing. Okay? Let me back up for a second and show you this part. What happens to Baxter when he leaves? Well, he establishes a home base, an exile government in the Anthony House down the street. That's the only other three-story structure in Little Rock. So now we got the state capitol and the Anthony House, like twin towers in this massive showdown of Reconstruction Arkansas. And the Anthony House just so happens to have the telegraph station. Hey, that's pretty strategically smart, dude. Yes, it is. And so Baxter is sending telegraphs like crazy. And that's how these guys know to head to Little Rock. And that's how, there's people actually listening to these telegraphs in Washington, D.C., and they're watching this like, man, what could happen if that blows up and goes really south? Thank you very much. I got time cards in the back, like how much I got left. All right, so again, coming up from the Pine Bluff side, okay? We've got troops coming up and they're like, they're racing to Little Rock. But if we're racing, and I'm like, let's cut them off, boys. And so one account said that there were 1 man killed or up to 8 killed or wounded. There's a big deal difference between killed or wounded. All accounts say that there was 40 killed down there. And so we started, there's no two sets of numbers that match on the killed or wounded in any of these little battles. We do find, though, that because it was a moving thing, there skirmishes instead of battles probably, and there were injured and there were killed and alarmed. They blew up a steam engine and the captain dies, we know for sure. Probably some others were injured. And they didn't stop and count. They were on their way to Little Rock. Like they were on the run. And so the numbers, it's like we could both see an event and remember it differently. And I think that is a large part of why the numbers don't match up. Also, the newspapers are writing for a purpose. They have reasons behind them. Troops reinforcing the old State House. And then we got Lady Baxter. So everybody wants to know, what about that cannon? This is the whole reason we're here today, folks, is that lovely cannon on the front. I wish I had time to talk more about the cannon. I do not. The cannon's here from the Brooks-Baxter War because it resurfaced, because there's 2 or 3 versions of how it was dug up from the river, the mud, off the bank. It happened. Somehow they dug this cannon back up and drug it down to the Anthony House and aimed it at the old State House. That was the Baxter side, in case you're keeping notes. And the Brooks had already taken the arsenal on the ground here, which had 2 small artillery pieces, not a massive 3,000-pound broadside. That would kill your horses trying to drag that around, by the way. And so he had these artillery pieces positioned where they could drag both of them to the river or the front, and they're getting ready for a war. Okay? Here's an artist rendering of troops engaged on both sides. And okay, side note, oral history is 1978. There's a guy who starts talking about the Brooks-Baxter War, and they're like, you weren't around for that. You know, we knew, you know, but in 78, Michelle Watson knew the guy wasn't from the Brooks, but he'd grown up listening to this story. So part of it's true. There was only 1 man shot and killed in Arkansas, in Little Rock, but he wasn't this guy. O.L.B. Lee. Does anybody know this one yet? Like even my esteemed colleagues, good. He shot him in the knees of the canyon and bowed his legs out and he walked around like that for the rest of his life. That's insane on so many levels, but it's in the oral histories of the Old State House. Okay, so this is an artist's rendering, but it's good job capturing the Anthony House, that 3-story structure. Okay, and the federal troops kind of breaking up the guys when they're there for a month, guys, and they're bolstering and they're mouthing each other. They know each other. Okay, they came from the same places. I was telling the tour guys, it's that scene in Young Guns where they yell out the window, "I see Pippin's with you," right? And then he shoots him and Pippin ain't with you no more. They knew each other. They were calling each other names, and I can imagine. I got to make this into a movie someday. All right, so the Little Rock Republican probably tells us the one man who was shot in Little Rock. It was all this was about Little Rock and taking the capital, and so these guys were out there mouthing each other, and this colonel said something, and somebody wanted to fire across his bow, like shoot at the colonel or fire up in the air. And so poor Mr. Shaw is standing at the window having some coffee, watching these guys, and it's like, man, that's crazy down there. And he accidentally gets shot and killed. The only guy to die in Little Rock was a guy that wasn't even involved. That's irony, folks, is what that is. One thing to note here, this is the colored men commits the discharge, and it wasn't everybody, it was just the colored men that did it. Probably a white guy wrote that from 1874. That's one thing we're not talking about, is these guys in 74 aren't bringing race up that much at all. But you got to assume that was an overbearing thing. Like you've got hundreds of colored armed troops in the streets of Little Rock. That's going to scare some of these people. And it's not really talked about, but that's a factor also. So President Grant comes in and he says, everybody go home. what are you people doing in Arkansas? Okay, go. Just essentially, yeah, nobody was wrong. Nobody did it. No foul. Like everybody just go home and be cool. That's he said. He uses my line. Just be cool, everybody. So here's an example of one of the reasons we have a hard time understanding Brooks-Baxter. This says the Brooks forces evacuating the State House, 1874, right? That's the hyphen, which is built in 1885. That's the statue that was placed at earliest in 1878. But man, makes for a good story, don't it? How many times do people tell me that when I correct them at the Thanksgiving dinner table, right? So Brooks and Baxter, what happened after this, right? It's a 30-day engagement of two men. You know, butting heads is the term we use, and it just how happens I love goat pictures. And so, at the end, Brooks is returned to the governor's office by declaration of President Grant. Okay? The result of the war is also a practical end to Republican rule and ended the era of Reconstruction in Arkansas, because after this, things changed drastically, and we don't even have time. I'm down to, like 5 minutes. So, in summation, this is where it gets fun. I have built a lovely, easy to understand graphic for you, my esteemed colleagues and friends. Buckle up. So Brooks supports Clayton, who doesn't support Brooks. And then Brooks supports Baxter, and Brooks supports the ex-Confeds. Okay, Clayton supports Baxter, and the Confeds support Baxter. Baxter supports Confeds, but Brooks doesn't support Baxter, but the Confeds support Brooks. Baxter doesn't support Clayton, and Clayton does support Brooks, and then Grant comes in and supports Clayton and Baxter and Brooks. Simple, right? Now, that, in case you were keeping notes, is correct. All right? Daniel did his homework. That's essentially the way it went down. And that, in a nutshell, is why people can't understand it. It doesn't make sense, because if you take the people who are the constituency of Joseph Brooks and the people who are the constituency of Elisha Baxter, by the time it's all said and done, they've essentially swapped places for who, and that doesn't make sense. Why would they do such a thing? They had the same political platforms. It was easy. I just don't like the guy now, but his platform's the same as the other guy, so I'm going to go support the other guy. This is wonderful reading after about page 7. This is the argument in favor of Joseph Brooks, written by Attorney General Williams. And he starts with the Federalist papers, pre-U.S., and he goes on to several moments in the U.S. Constitution that are amazing pieces of literature and support Joseph Brooks, because that's what the founding fathers were doing. And after a while, he does break into the fact that even though Joseph Brooks had the numbers, that didn't matter. They say that here. They say that in the other one too. He says that by Elisha Baxter refusing to show up for court to even talk about Joseph Brooks' thing, that Baxter is also agreeing that Brooks had the numbers. So everybody agrees that Brooks probably won the election. We just don't care. Because as you know, the electoral, the votes don't matter if you've got the reasons and the people behind you. All right, this is another excellent piece of reading if you like the word said and therefore. There's a lot of those in this. The said party of the first kind of thing, right? And we read through that. It's over to History Commission. So in summation of the summation, let's find out what happened to our key players. So Powell Clayton was appointed the first ambassador to Mexico. That's kind of cool. That's a big deal. He resigns in 1905 and dies in D.C. He's always politically connected, living the good life. Joseph Brooks, a month after this goes down, receives President Grant an appointment as a post office, a postmaster general. That's a federal position. That's a big deal in 1800s. Okay, that's a federal job. It's not elected. Nobody's going to be elected to remove you out of office as postmaster. So he gets a good thing. Other than he gets sick and dies like 3 years later. Very unfortunate, right? Elisha Baxter goes back to practicing law. Tries to get a seat in Congress or Senate in 78, but the Democrats won't have anything with him. Complicated reason why. Again, we're way out of time. He returns to Batesville, practices law, and Baxter County's named after him, and he dies in 1899. I would hope that I've answered all of your potential questions. However, the realist in me knows that you have questions, and I promise to do my best to answer your questions with more questions. Because that's what I can say honestly, is that every time we got another piece of research, we found a discrepancy in our other research. And so we thought we had a good solid position, and then Amanda Cockrell was like, Daniel, you know what we were talking about yesterday? I was like, yeah. It's like, I found another one that said that wasn't right. And so we would do the same thing, like for 3, 4. I got another newspaper article that says that was wrong. And so even from the very end, okay, let me back up a second. What is this stuff about? Look at the date. In November of 1874, right? So this is after all this is happening. They essentially go in and they say, Joseph Brooks didn't break any laws. Elisha Baxter didn't break any laws. They had the legal on their side. So even though we think, well, it's this bloody, guy come in and beat up the governor and took it by force, that it really didn't happen that way. Nobody died in Little Rock. Only the guy got shot was an accident. Baxter really preached the peaceful method to his troops. He's like, no, we're going to let the law play out. But that's boring. So we call it the Brooks-Baxter War, right? One of my future topics is going to be who coined that term? Where did that come from? Who was the first guy to call it a war and why? And well, I know why. These guys had all fought in the Civil War before, right? Or the War of the Rebellion, which everybody loves to use that in the South. So that's it in a nutshell. So have I simplified the Brooks-Baxter War? Absolutely not, Daniel. All I've done is confuse you with 18 different style of fonts and a bunch of goat and baby pictures, right? But I want you to understand that there's a reason that Mark Christ hasn't written a book on this yet, okay? If it were easy, he would have already done it. So, nobody's really scowling at me that bad except for Mrs. Nash. So I can understand. I mean, I was pretty hard on her family. But questions, please. We got like 3 minutes. Yeah, of course.
Was it true that in 1874, before nominating Augustus Garland, that the Democrats actually offered their nomination to Baxter?
Absolutely, and he turned him down. And that's one of the reasons that he wasn't their candidate for the Senate seat in 78, because he turned them down. Because he had gone out of his way to jump to their side in that 73 year, And so they were going to give him a bone. They were going to like, look, man, you want to be governor? He's like, I wouldn't feel right doing it now because there's too much. There was a lot of discrepancy, and his reasons were essentially that I wouldn't feel right doing it. And so they're like, all right, we're done with you. They washed their hands. And they didn't give him the. So it's a good question, and I knew the answer to it. How about that, Leah? Do you have a question?
Which group would you say actually got what they wanted out of all this?
It's a good question. Which group got what they wanted? The ex-Confederate Democrats got what they wanted because the Powell-Clayton guys start losing seats quick. And some of that earlier maneuvering where they appointed some of those legislative seats, those were filled when they got the vote with Democrat ex-Confeds, and it was just a short time before so that's the only guys that really got what they wanted. I don't know. Ambassador to Mexico is probably a good gig. Powell-Clayton probably did all right. The federal post to the post office, that was a pretty good gig. Everybody walks away like nobody really did anything. We're just going to go home now. That's the weirdest ending to a war I've ever read. And that's where the confusion starts. It's like, they just went home. That's the way I'm going to start my movie, by the way. It's going to be the end. And we're like, what happened? Why did they just go home? Yes, sir.
Where was the Anthony house in relation to this?
Okay, so it's going to be about on Markham. That way, probably about 4 blocks. I think there's a parking lot there. The other side of the Capitol Hotel, somewhere in that block there. Scott Street in Louisiana or Maine, one of those. Excellent.
I'm pretty sure it was Scott Mark.
Scott and Mark. Well, yeah, it's Scott and Markham. Anybody else, man? These are softballs. I'm loving them. I appreciate that because everybody's kind of feeling me. Now, that graphic really says it all. Like, that's why the 7th graders don't understand what went on. I taught this to the 7th graders for 5 years in a row and never had anybody pass a test on it. Like, people who've taught it, they know that that's the thing. It's like, what is a brindle tail? What a minstrel? Even in college freshman Arkansas history, people get that. That is the most missed answer about Brooks-Baxter, who was on each side. I know they should have used more pictures in college freshman Arkansas history, because if you got the bull pitcher and a carpetbagger, and really I could do a whole hour of just like flashcards, Baxter, carpetbagger, scallywag, and then have like a 3-question test on it, then a college freshman would answer that correctly. All right, no other questions. Thank you very much, guys. We appreciate it.